My first guest is a good friend, I still think. He was rooting for me on the mountain.
Johnny Carson's dark secret exposed after 30 years. His own family finally breaks their silence about what really happened behind the scenes. What they revealed about America's most beloved night TV host will leave you speechless. You'll never believe what this perfect man did to his own son. The truth will make your blood run cold. His wife's terrifying confession changes everything. This secret has been hidden for decades, until now.
The lowest point I had was when it was my first divorce. Because my children were quite young, and that sense of failure overcome.
Yet behind the curtain of Studio 6B, away from the bright lights and thunderous applause, existed a very different Johnny Carson. The same man who could make millions laugh with a raised eyebrow or perfectly timed pause, struggled with demons that would plague him throughout his personal life. While audiences saw the polished performer in his perfectly tailored suits, those closest to Carson witnessed a man battling alcoholism, fractured family relationships, and a pattern of destructive behavior that would span decades. The most tragic aspect of Carson's private life centered around his relationship with his three sons from his first marriage to Jody Wolcott. Christopher, Rick, and Corey Carson grew up watching their father become one of the most famous men in America, yet they struggled to form meaningful connections with him. According to Carson's former lawyer and confidant, Henry Bushkin, the television host was far better at connecting with his audience than with his own children. Rick Carson, the middle child born in 1952, bore the heaviest burden of his father's neglect. From an early age, Rick displayed signs of emotional and behavioral problems that would later develop into serious mental health issues. During the 1960s and 1970s, mental illness carried significant stigma, particularly for public figures like Johnny Carson. Rather than seeking help or standing by his son during his struggles, Carson chose to distance himself from Rick's problems. This distance became most apparent when Rick required hospitalization for his mental health issues. According to Bushkin, Carson refused to visit his son during a lengthy stay at Bellevue Hospital in New York, where Rick spent 4.5 months receiving treatment. Bushkin, who felt compelled to fill the void left by Carson's absence, visited Rick regularly and handled many of the practical arrangements that a father typically would. The lawyer later recalled the pain of watching a young man struggle with serious mental illness, while his famous father remained conspicuously absent. Carson's relationship with Rick never recovered from this period of abandonment. The two remained estranged for years, with Carson seemingly unable or unwilling to bridge the gap that had formed between them. Rick, meanwhile, continued to struggle with his mental health while trying to build his own life and career. He served in the U.S. Navy, following in his father's footsteps, and later pursued photography, developing a particular interest in nature photography that would become his passion. The tragedy reached its devastating conclusion on June 21, 1991, when Rick was driving along the scenic Pacific Coast Highway near Cayucos, California. According to police reports, Rick had stopped to take photographs of the coastal landscape when his vehicle plunged more than 100 feet down an embankment. Investigators determined that Rick, who was 39 years old, had been focused on his photography when his attention was diverted, causing him to make an unsafe turning movement that sent his car over the cliff. He died instantly from severe internal injuries. The news of Rick's death hit Carson hard, though he had not spoken to his son in years. Carson took 4 weeks off from the show following Rick's death, returning only when he felt emotionally capable of facing his audience. When Carson finally returned to The Tonight Show, he delivered a heartfelt tribute to Rick that revealed a side of the host that viewers rarely saw. Fighting back tears, Carson showed photographs of his son and spoke about Rick's gentle nature and infectious laugh. Yet even in death, Carson's tribute highlighted the painful reality of their relationship. While he spoke lovingly of his son's character and talents, Carson never publicly addressed the years of estrangement or his absence during Rick's mental health struggles. Carson's struggles with fatherhood were closely connected to another destructive force in his life: his relationship with alcohol. While Carson was never one to drink heavily in public or appear intoxicated on television, those close to him knew that alcohol had a profound and troubling effect on his personality. When sober, Carson could be charming and witty, the same person audiences loved on television. But when he drank, he transformed into someone his family and friends barely recognized. The extent of Carson's drinking problem became clear during a 1977 interview with 60 Minutes, where he made a rare public admission about his struggles with alcohol. Speaking candidly with the interviewer, Carson acknowledged that he didn't handle alcohol well and that it had become a significant problem in his life. He also mentioned his drinking sessions with his longtime sidekick Ed McMahon, hinting at the social nature of his alcohol consumption. Despite this public acknowledgement, Carson continued to drink, and the consequences became increasingly difficult to ignore. His drinking affected his behavior at home, where his wives and children bore the brunt of his alcohol-fueled mood swings and erratic behavior. According to accounts from his former spouses, Carson became an entirely different person when he drank. Aggressive, unpredictable, and sometimes frightening. The most public consequence of Carson's drinking came in February 1982, when he was arrested for driving under the influence while leaving an Italian restaurant in Beverly Hills. Carson had been driving his DeLorean sports car when police pulled him over for not having current registration tags. During the stop, officers determined that Carson's blood alcohol level was 0.16%, significantly above the legal limit of 0.1%. The arrest made headlines across the country, forcing Carson to address the incident on The Tonight Show. In typical Carson fashion, he initially tried to make light of the situation, joking with his audience about whether they wanted to serve as character witnesses in court. But he also expressed genuine regret, telling viewers that they would never see him do such a thing again. Carson ultimately pleaded no contest to the charges in October 1982, receiving the maximum sentence short of jail time. He was fined $603, placed on 3 years of probation, and required to attend an alcohol education program. Perhaps most restrictively, his driver's license was limited to trips between his home and NBC studios, and he was prohibited from carrying passengers, including pets. The legal consequences of his DUI arrest were significant, but they did little to address the underlying issues that led to Carson's drinking. His alcohol problems continued to affect his personal relationships, contributing to the breakdown of multiple marriages and further damaging his already strained relationship with his children. Carson's troubles extended beyond alcohol into his romantic relationships, where he established patterns of infidelity and instability that would repeat throughout his 4 marriages. His first marriage to Jody Wolcott, which began in 1949, was marked by mutual affairs and volatile arguments. According to the recent biography, Carson the Magnificent, both Johnny and Jody engaged in affairs during their marriage, creating a dynamic that was fueled by alcohol and resentment. The authors described frequent arguments and what they termed boozy rows that sometimes occurred in front of other couples, suggesting that Carson's personal problems were becoming increasingly difficult to hide. This dysfunction in Carson's first marriage had a direct impact on his 3 sons, who grew up witnessing their parents' troubled relationship. The combination of their father's emotional absence, his drinking problem, and the instability of his marriage to their mother created an environment that was far from the stable, loving home that children need to thrive. This early instability may have contributed to Rick's later mental health struggles and the difficulties all 3 sons had in maintaining close relationships with their famous father. Carson's pattern of destructive relationships continued into his second marriage to flight attendant Joanne Copeland, which began in 1963. Like his first marriage, this relationship was marked by mutual infidelity and Carson's increasingly problematic drinking. The marriage to Copeland became particularly notorious due to her affair with former football star Frank Gifford, which Carson discovered in a dramatic fashion that revealed both his paranoia and his willingness to go to extreme lengths to uncover the truth about his wife's behavior. According to Henry Bushkin's account, Carson became obsessed with proving Copeland's infidelity and convinced his lawyer to help him break into the apartment where he suspected the affair was taking place. The break-in revealed extensive evidence of Copeland's relationship with Gifford, including photographs and personal items. Carson's reaction to this discovery was both dramatic and telling. He broke down in tears, overwhelmed by the confirmation of what he had long suspected. Yet Carson's devastation over his wife's infidelity was complicated by his own behavior. Even as he grieved over Copeland's betrayal, Carson was conducting his own affairs with multiple women. This contradiction highlighted one of the central paradoxes of Carson's personality, his ability to hold others to standards that he consistently failed to meet himself. Carson's marriage to Copeland finally ended in divorce in 1972, with Copeland receiving a substantial settlement. Despite the bitter end of their marriage, Copeland later spoke positively about Carson's professional abilities, though she made it clear that she would never consider reconciling with him. The pattern established in Carson's first 2 marriages would continue to define his approach to relationships throughout his life. His personal struggles were particularly tragic because they occurred at the height of his professional success. As The Tonight Show reached new levels of popularity, making Carson one of the most powerful figures in entertainment, his private life continued to deteriorate. The contrast between his public persona as America's beloved late-night host and his private reality as a troubled man struggling with addiction and family dysfunction became increasingly stark, raising questions about the price of fame and the ways in which public success can mask private suffering. While Johnny Carson's second marriage crumbled under the weight of mutual infidelity and his drinking problems, the breakdown revealed patterns of behavior that would define all of his relationships. The discovery of Joanne Copeland's affair with Frank Gifford had devastated Carson, but his reaction exposed both his capacity for obsession and his own moral contradictions. Even as he wept over his wife's unfaithfulness, Carson was conducting multiple affairs of his own, suggesting that his pain came not from genuine commitment to marital fidelity, but from wounded pride and a need to control those closest to him. During the lengthy divorce proceedings with Copeland in 1972, Carson began an affair with Angel Tompkins, a striking blonde actress and Playboy model who had gained attention for her role in the 1970 comedy I Love My Wife. Tompkins had appeared in Playboy magazine's February 1972 pictorial and represented the type of glamorous woman Carson was consistently drawn to throughout his life. Henry Bushkin, Carson's lawyer at the time, warned him that conducting such a public affair during divorce proceedings could seriously damage his financial position in the settlement. Carson's response revealed both his arrogance and his inability to control his impulses. "Screw him," Carson told Bushkin. "A stiff penis has no conscience." His crude dismissal of legal advice would prove costly, as Carson was ultimately forced to pay Copeland a substantial settlement of nearly $500,000, plus ongoing alimony payments. Yet Carson's relationship with Tompkins followed the same destructive pattern that characterized all of his romantic involvements. According to sources close to Carson, he was unfaithful to Tompkins even while conducting an affair with her. When Tompkins discovered his other liaisons, Carson attempted to buy her silence through expensive gifts, including a Rolls-Royce, a suite at the prestigious Pierre Hotel in New York, and diamonds worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. This pattern of using material gifts as substitutes for emotional commitment would repeat throughout Carson's subsequent relationships. The gifts served multiple purposes. They assuaged Carson's guilt, demonstrated his wealth and power, and created a sense of obligation in his partners. Yet these expensive gestures never addressed the underlying issues that made Carson incapable of maintaining faithful, intimate relationships. The roots of Carson's troubled approach to relationships can be traced to his relationship with his mother, Ruth Carson. Born Ruth Elizabeth Hook in 1901, she was known by those who knew the family as a difficult and withholding woman who ran her household with an iron fist. Friends and family members described her as being like the captain of a warship, maintaining strict control over every aspect of domestic life. Ruth's approach to motherhood was notably cold and critical, particularly toward her son Johnny. Despite his eventual fame and success, Ruth rarely offered praise or encouragement. She seemed incapable of expressing pride in Johnny's accomplishments, even when he became one of the most famous entertainers in America. According to actor Burt Reynolds, who became close friends with Carson over many years, Johnny complained constantly about his mother's treatment of him. Reynolds wrote in his memoir that Carson would say, "For as long as we were friends, Johnny complained about his mother." The extent of Ruth's emotional cruelty became clear through various incidents that Carson shared with close friends. When Carson won the Television Academy's Governor's Award for Lifetime Achievement, he called his mother to share the news, hoping finally to earn her approval. "Mom, they're giving me the Governor's Award. It's for lifetime achievement in the television industry," Carson told her. Ruth's response was characteristically dismissive. "Well, I suppose they know what they're doing." When a reporter once watched The Tonight Show with Ruth to get the proud mother's reaction, she frowned throughout Carson's monologue and simply said, "That wasn't funny," before leaving the room. This pattern of emotional withholding had a profound impact on Carson's psychological development. Ruth's inability to provide unconditional love created a void in Carson that he would spend his entire life trying to fill. The constant pursuit of his mother's approval may have driven his professional success, but it also left him emotionally stunted and unable to connect genuinely with others. Carson often referred to his mother using the harshest possible terms, calling her Lady Macbeth and the Wicked Witch. He blamed Ruth directly for his failures in marriage, once telling friends, "My marriage failed because she screwed me up." According to Henry Bushkin, Carson suffered from what he called a toxic sort of mother, who couldn't give a compliment. Carson would say of Ruth, "She's the toughest son of a bitch of them all. There is no goddamn way to please that woman." The most telling example of Carson's relationship with Ruth came when she died in 1985. Rather than mourning his mother's passing, Carson's immediate reaction was celebratory. "The Wicked Witch is dead," he announced to friends, refusing to attend her funeral services. This reaction shocked even those who knew about their difficult relationship, revealing the depth of resentment that had built up over decades. Yet despite his harsh words about Ruth, Carson's behavior suggested that her influence remained powerful even after her death. When family members cleaned out Ruth's home, they discovered a large box filled with newspaper clippings and materials documenting Johnny's career achievements. Ruth had secretly been collecting evidence of her son's success for years, suggesting that she may have felt pride even if she was incapable of expressing it. Carson took this box and kept it in his bedroom closet for the rest of his life, indicating that some part of him still craved his mother's approval. The toxic dynamic between Carson and his mother established patterns that would repeat in all of his romantic relationships. Just as Ruth had been withholding her love, Carson became withholding with his wives and partners. The very qualities that had made his childhood so difficult became the qualities he exhibited as an adult, perpetuating the cycle of emotional damage that Ruth had begun. This pattern became evident in Carson's third marriage to Joanna Holland, which began in 1972. Holland was a sophisticated former model from New York's glamorous social scene. Carson met her at the exclusive 21 Club in 1971, admitting he was flirting like a sophomore during their first encounter. He began calling her every day at exactly 4:30 p.m. for an entire year, demonstrating the obsessive behavior that characterized many of his relationships. Their marriage in September 1972 shocked friends when Carson announced their secret wedding during The Tonight Show's anniversary party. Initially, Carson's lawyers insisted on a prenuptial agreement, but Carson rejected the idea for sentimental reasons. However, the marriage followed the same destructive patterns. Carson's drinking continued to be a problem, and Joanna later described him as becoming two different people when he drank. The marriage was also plagued by Carson's continued infidelities, which he attempted to compensate for through lavish gifts, including diamonds, luxury cars, and expensive real estate. The most dramatic example of Carson's controlling behavior occurred during his fourth marriage to Alexis Mas in 1987. Just 3 weeks into their honeymoon aboard a luxury yacht in Italy, Carson delivered a chilling ultimatum when Alexis made a comment that displeased him. "We've been married for 3 weeks," Carson told his new bride. "If you say something like that again, this marriage won't last another 3 weeks." This threat, delivered during what should have been one of the happiest times in their relationship, demonstrated Carson's need to dominate and control his partners through fear and intimidation. The combination of his mother's influence, his alcohol problems, and his inability to take responsibility for his own behavior created a pattern of relationship dysfunction that Carson never overcame. Each marriage began with hope and grand gestures, but inevitably deteriorated into the same patterns of infidelity, emotional abuse, and mutual resentment. Carson's wealth and fame allowed him to attract accomplished women, but his psychological limitations prevented him from building lasting partnerships. The man who could make millions feel entertained remained largely unable to connect genuinely with those closest to him. Carson's personal dysfunction extended far beyond his family relationships into his professional life, where his need for control and fragile ego created bitter feuds that revealed the darker aspects of his personality. While millions saw Carson as the charming host who could make anyone comfortable, those in the entertainment industry knew a different side of the man. Behind the scenes, Carson was known for his jealousy, his capacity for holding grudges, and his willingness to use his enormous platform to destroy those who crossed him. The most notorious of Carson's professional feuds began in 1980, when both he and Las Vegas entertainer Wayne Newton set their sights on purchasing the troubled Aladdin Hotel and Casino. The Aladdin had been stripped of its gaming licenses after regulators discovered that Detroit mobsters had hidden interests in the casino, and both Carson and Newton saw an opportunity to acquire prime Las Vegas real estate. Carson, partnering with gaming executive Ed Negro, initially appeared to be the front-runner for the purchase. However, the deal fell through when the sellers became frustrated with Carson and Negro's constantly changing terms and conditions. According to Newton, every time a deal seemed close to completion, Carson's team would alter their offer, making negotiations increasingly difficult. Frustrated by these tactics, the Aladdin stockholders turned to Newton, who had made a standing offer of $105 million for the property. Newton later recalled receiving a call at 2 a.m. after finishing a show at the Sands. By 8 a.m. that morning, he was meeting with the sellers and closing the deal. Carson's reaction to losing the Aladdin revealed the depths of his vindictiveness and inability to accept defeat gracefully. Rather than moving on from the business disappointment, Carson became obsessed with the idea that he had been portrayed in the media as a loser. According to Henry Bushkin, Carson was particularly annoyed by news reports suggesting he had lost the deal to Newton, viewing this coverage as personal humiliation that demanded revenge. Carson's weapon of choice was The Tonight Show itself. Beginning almost immediately after Newton's purchase was announced, Carson began incorporating jokes about Newton into his monologues, targeting the entertainer's appearance, masculinity, and Vegas persona. These weren't gentle, good-natured ribbing between colleagues, but calculated attacks designed to humiliate Newton and damage his reputation. Carson's jokes often played on stereotypes and innuendos, suggesting questions about Newton's sexual orientation and mocking his high-pitched voice and stage persona. Newton later described the psychological toll of Carson's campaign against him, explaining how the constant ridicule affected his family life. He recalled watching his mother cry when she saw the jokes on television. He was very angry with me and started jokes on his show, and having other comedians join in with those jokes about my lack of manhood, I guess is the best way to say it, Newton explained. There was no rhyme or reason for it, no truth in fact at all. It was just his being so bent out of shape that I had ended up with the hotel. The situation reached a breaking point when Newton decided he could no longer tolerate Carson's attacks. After a year and a half of trying unsuccessfully to reach Carson through intermediaries, Newton took direct action. He drove to NBC's Burbank studios, walked into Carson's office unannounced, and delivered an ultimatum that finally put an end to the harassment. "If you slander me on air one more time, I will beat you right here," Newton told Carson in front of witnesses. The confrontation worked. Carson immediately stopped making jokes about Newton, understanding that Newton was serious about his threat. Carson's jealousy and vindictiveness weren't limited to his rivalry with Newton. He also harbored deep resentment toward Tom Snyder, the host of Tomorrow, the talk show that aired immediately after The Tonight Show on NBC. Snyder's program, which featured intimate one-on-one interviews without a studio audience, had gained critical acclaim and developed a devoted following. To Carson, who viewed the time slot following his show as his territory, Snyder's success felt like a personal invasion. The animosity came to a head during a dinner at Chasen's restaurant in Los Angeles in 1979. Carson, Snyder, Ed McMahon, and several other entertainment figures were dining at the same restaurant when Snyder, attempting to be collegial, sent a round of drinks to Carson's table. Rather than appreciating the gesture, Carson saw it as presumptuous and intrusive. According to Henry Bushkin, Carson had long harbored a serious dislike for Snyder based on nothing but his performances on TV, and thought Snyder had no talent and was an officious bore. As the evening progressed and Carson consumed more alcohol, his resentment toward Snyder grew more pronounced. He began making loud, disparaging comments about Snyder's show and interviewing style, calling him a mad dog and mocking his approach to television. The situation escalated when Carson, emboldened by alcohol, approached Snyder's table and attempted to physically confront him, lunging across the table in an apparent attempt to grab Snyder by the throat. Only Ed McMahon's intervention prevented what could have become a physical altercation between the two talk show hosts. Perhaps no guest on The Tonight Show generated more private contempt from Carson than Bob Hope, the legendary comedian who had been NBC's biggest star for decades before Carson's arrival. Hope's frequent appearances on Carson's show were a source of constant frustration for the host, who found Hope's approach to comedy completely contrary to his own sensibilities. Where Carson prized spontaneity and improvisation, Hope relied entirely on carefully scripted material prepared by his team of writers. Hope's appearances followed a predictable pattern that Carson found increasingly tedious. Hope would arrive with prepared jokes and a specific set of questions he wanted Carson to ask. If Carson deviated from the script or asked questions out of order, Hope would become confused and give answers that didn't match the questions being asked. According to Andrew Nichols, one of Carson's head writers, there was nothing spontaneous about Hope. He was a guy who relied on his writers for every topic, As Hope aged, his appearances became even more problematic. His hearing and eyesight were failing, making it difficult for him to pick up Carson's questions or respond appropriately to unexpected moments. Carson had to stick precisely to prepared notes, essentially turning himself into a straight man for Hope's rehearsed routine. The spontaneous banter that characterized Carson's best interviews was impossible when Hope was the guest. Carson's frustration with Hope was compounded by the comedian's privileged position at NBC. As the network's longest-running star, Hope could essentially book himself on The Tonight Show whenever he had something to promote. Producer Peter Lassley recalled the dilemma this created. We'd get a request and Johnny would go, "Again?" And I'd say, "Do you want to tell him no?" And he'd say, "No? You can't turn down Bob Hope?" Carson's private comments about Hope revealed the depth of his disdain. After particularly difficult appearances, Carson would make cutting remarks to his staff about Hope's declining abilities. According to Nichols, Carson once said after a particularly painful Hope appearance, "If I ever end up like that, guys, I want you to shoot me." This comment reflected not just Carson's frustration with Hope's performance, but his own fears about aging and becoming irrelevant in the entertainment industry. Carson's cruelty extended beyond fellow entertainers to include regular guests. He was known for making cutting remarks about guests' appearances, particularly targeting those who were overweight. Actor Raymond Burr, who starred in Perry Mason and later Ironside, became a particular target during his appearances on The Tonight Show. Rather than treating Burr with respect due to an accomplished actor, Carson repeatedly made jokes about his weight, comparing him to freight ships and suggesting that studio furniture might collapse. These attacks were so persistent that Burr eventually refused to appear on The Tonight Show again. The pattern of professional feuds and workplace cruelty that characterized Carson's career reflected deeper issues with his personality. His need to dominate every situation, his inability to tolerate perceived slights, and his willingness to use his platform to destroy those who crossed him revealed a man whose public charm masked a capacity for genuine malice. While audiences saw Carson as the witty, approachable host, those who worked with him knew that his warmth was conditional and could turn to ice at any perceived threat to his position or ego. Despite all his personal failings and professional cruelties, Johnny Carson's influence on American culture was undeniable and transformative. His power extended far beyond entertainment, reaching into politics, social norms, and the very fabric of how Americans experienced their daily lives. Perhaps no incident better illustrated the scope of Carson's cultural influence than what became known as the Great Toilet Paper Scare of 1973, a bizarre episode that demonstrated how a single joke from Carson could trigger a nationwide panic. The incident began in December 1973 when Congressman Harold Froelich of Wisconsin issued a press release warning about a potential toilet paper shortage. Froelich's statement was cautionary, mentioning that the United States may face a serious shortage of toilet paper within a few months. The key word was potential. Froelich was warning about a possible future problem, not announcing an existing crisis. However, when Carson's writers picked up the story for his December 1973 monologue, they omitted the crucial qualifier. Carson told his audience of roughly 20 million viewers, "You know, we've got all sorts of shortages these days, but have you heard the latest? I'm not kidding. There is an acute shortage of toilet paper in the good old United States." He then joked about a fictional commercial where a housewife says, "Forget the coffee, just give me the shopping bag." The reaction was immediate and nationwide. Within hours of the broadcast, Americans began flooding grocery stores and supermarkets, buying up every roll of toilet paper they could find. Store managers across the country reported unprecedented demand, with customers purchasing cases rather than packages. A Seattle store that had ordered 21 cases received only 3, adding to the hysteria. In Appleton, Wisconsin, customers stripped shelves as quickly as they could be restocked, with one woman attempting to purchase 10 cases at once. Carson quickly recognized the chaos he had unleashed and attempted to correct the situation. On a subsequent broadcast, he faced the camera directly and offered a sincere apology. "I don't want to be remembered as the man who created a false toilet paper scare," he told his viewers. "I just picked up the item from the paper and enlarged it somewhat. There is no shortage." But the damage was done. The panic had taken on a life of its own, and Carson's attempt at clarification couldn't stop the hoarding behavior that had already swept the nation. The toilet paper incident perfectly encapsulated Carson's unique position in American culture. He wasn't just an entertainer, he was a trusted voice that millions of Americans listened to every night before going to sleep. His words carried weight that even he sometimes didn't fully appreciate. In an era when television options were limited and Carson faced little competition in late-night television, his influence was virtually unparalleled. No comedian or television host today possesses the kind of cultural authority that Carson wielded during his 3-decade reign. Carson's impact on American entertainment was equally profound and lasting. His version of The Tonight Show established the template that late-night television still follows today. An opening monologue, guest interviews, comedy sketches, and musical performances, all held together by the host's personality and wit. Before Carson, late-night television was more experimental and varied in format. After Carson, every late-night host essentially copied his blueprint with minor variations. More importantly, Carson served as a launching pad for countless careers in comedy and entertainment. A successful appearance on The Tonight Show could transform an unknown performer into a star overnight. Carson's approval, signaled by his invitation for a guest to join him at his desk after a performance, was considered the highest honor in comedy. Stand-up comedians like Jerry Seinfeld, David Letterman, Ellen DeGeneres, Robin Williams, and Eddie Murphy all credited Carson with giving them their big breaks. Carson's approach to hosting was characterized by his apparent effortlessness and his ability to make guests feel comfortable while drawing out their most entertaining qualities. His timing was impeccable, his reactions genuine, and his ability to salvage awkward moments legendary. The cultural rituals Carson created became embedded in American life. His opening monologue provided nightly commentary on current events, filtered through humor that was pointed but never cruel, topical but never partisan. Carson's characters and sketches became part of the national conversation. Karnak the Magnificent, his psychic character who provided answers to questions and sealed envelopes, generated countless memorable moments. His interactions with animal experts and holiday specials became annual traditions that families across America looked forward to watching together. Perhaps most significantly, Carson maintained his massive influence while steadfastly refusing to use his platform for political advocacy beyond gentle humor. In a 1979 interview with Mike Wallace, Carson articulated his philosophy about entertainers and political discourse. "I think there's a danger in getting too serious about this business," Carson said. "The danger of what Johnny Carson or someone like me might be if we begin to take ourselves seriously and begin thinking we can influence people. That's when you're in trouble." I think comedians function best when they're being comedians. This approach kept Carson above the partisan fray and allowed him to maintain broad appeal across political and social divisions. Unlike many modern late-night hosts who use their platforms for political advocacy, Carson understood that his greatest power lay in his ability to unite rather than divide his audience. When Carson announced his retirement in 1991, it marked the end of an era in American entertainment. His final show on May 22, 1992, attracted over 50 million viewers, one of the largest audiences in television history. Carson's farewell speech was characteristically modest and heartfelt. "I am one of the luckiest people in the world," he told his audience. "I found something I always wanted to do, and I have enjoyed every single minute of it." Carson's retirement from public life was as complete as his dominance had been total. He moved to Malibu, pursued his interest in astronomy and sailing, and rarely gave interviews or made public appearances. When Carson died in January 2005 at age 79, the tributes from across the entertainment industry reflected the genuine affection and respect he had earned from his peers. The contradiction at the heart of Carson's legacy remains fascinating and troubling. The same man who could make millions of people feel understood and entertained was often unable to connect genuinely with his own family and closest colleagues. The performer who represented American optimism and humor struggled with alcoholism, failed marriages, and personal relationships marked by cruelty and manipulation. Perhaps this contradiction is what makes Carson's story so compelling and relevant. He was neither the saint that his public persona suggested, nor the monster that his personal behavior sometimes revealed. He was a complex human being whose enormous talents were matched by equally enormous flaws. His legacy forces us to grapple with uncomfortable questions about the relationship between public achievement and private character.